Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was pulled aside for a random security check at LaGuardia Airport. Her response was so calm, so measured, that the TSA agent's own behavior became impossible to ignore. The video of what happened next has been viewed millions of times. The morning rush at LaGuardia Airport moved with its usual chaotic rhythm. Travelers wheeled suitcases across polished floors, announcements echoed through the cavernous terminal, and the smell of coffee mixed with jet fuel hung in the recycled air. Gate numbers flashed on screens overhead, while passengers checked their phones, counted boarding passes, and navigated the maze of security lines that snaked toward the TSA checkpoint. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood in the pre-check line, her burgundy blazer wrinkle-free despite the early hour, a small leather messenger bag slung across her shoulder. She was traveling light this Tuesday morning, heading to a climate conference in San Francisco where she'd be speaking to a group of young environmental activists. The flight was at 8:45 a.m., and she'd arrived with plenty of time to spare. She moved through the line at the same pace as everyone else, no special treatment, no congressional escort. Her boarding pass and ID were ready in her hand as she approached the document checker, a middle-aged TSA agent whose name tag read Agent Martinez. She'd done this routine hundreds of times since taking office, and it was usually uneventful. "Good morning," Alexandria said with a genuine smile, handing over her documents. Agent Martinez took her ID and boarding pass, glancing at them briefly before looking back at her face. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a small frown creasing his forehead as his eyes moved from the photo to her face and back again. "This doesn't look like you," he said, holding up her congressional ID. Alexandria's eyebrows raised slightly. "I'm sorry?" "The photo," Martinez continued, comparing the ID to her face again. "You look different." "Different how?" she asked, her voice calm but curious. It was a genuine question, not confrontational, but seeking clarification. Martinez seemed flustered by her directness. "I don't know, just different. Can you step aside, please?" Alexandria looked at the ID in his hand, then back at his face. The photo was recent, taken just 8 months ago when she'd renewed her congressional credentials. Her hair was styled the same way, her features unchanged. She was wearing less makeup this morning, but the resemblance was unmistakable. "Agent Martinez," she said, reading his name tag. "Can you tell me specifically what looks different? I'd like to understand." Her tone wasn't challenging, but it wasn't submissive either. It was the voice of someone accustomed to asking questions and expecting answers, delivered with the calm confidence that had become her trademark in congressional hearings. Behind her, the line was backing up. Other passengers craned their necks to see what was causing the delay. Some recognized her immediately, their phones subtly emerging from pockets and purses. Martinez's jaw tightened. Instead of answering her question, he called over his supervisor, Agent Johnson, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, whose presence seemed to make the checkpoint feel smaller. "Random additional screening," Martinez said to Johnson, handing over Alexandria's documents. Alexandria repeated quietly, not to challenge but to clarify. "Can you explain how the random selection works?" Johnson barely glanced at the ID before looking Alexandria up and down with the kind of assessment that felt more personal than professional. "Ma'am, you need to step out of line. Additional screening, Gate 7. "I understand that," Alexandria said, her voice remaining steady. "I'm asking about the selection process. What criteria determine a random check?" The question hung in the air. Around them, the security checkpoint continued its usual buzz, but their corner felt frozen in time. Johnson's face reddened slightly, her authority being questioned in a way she clearly wasn't used to. "Ma'am, if you don't comply immediately, we'll have to call additional personnel." Alexandria nodded slowly, processing not just the words but the tone, the implication, the pattern she'd seen before. She stepped out of line, but she didn't move toward Gate 7 right away. "Before we proceed," she said, "I'd like to understand something. Agent Martinez said my ID doesn't look like me." "Agent Johnson, you mentioned random selection. Can you help me understand which one it is?" The question was asked without hostility, but it cut straight to the contradiction. A young woman in line behind where Alexandria had been standing raised her phone slightly. She was a graduate student at Columbia, traveling home to visit family, and she'd recognized both Alexandria and the familiar pattern of what was happening. Her thumb hovered over the record button. Johnson's eyes flicked to the growing crowd of onlookers, then back to Alexandria. "Ma'am, please proceed to Gate 7 now." "Of course," Alexandria said. "I just want to make sure I understand the process correctly. Is this about identification verification or random screening? Because the procedures are different for each, and I'd like to know which applies to my situation." Her congressional training showed in the precision of her language. She wasn't refusing compliance. She was seeking clarification about procedure. It was the kind of respectful but persistent questioning that had made her effective in committee hearings, and it was having the same effect here, exposing inconsistencies in real time. Martinez shifted uncomfortably, looking between Alexandria and his supervisor. He'd started this interaction with confidence, but her calm insistence on clarity was making him question his own actions. The photo did look like her. Even he could see that now. The graduate student hit record. What she captured was a 90-second interaction that would later be watched by millions. Alexandria, professional and composed, asking reasonable questions while two TSA agents struggled to provide coherent answers about why she was being singled out. "Gate 7 now," Johnson repeated, her voice sharper. Alexandria picked up her bag. "Thank you for the clarification," she said, though no clarification had actually been provided. "I'll proceed to Gate 7. As she walked toward the additional screening area, she could hear whispers spreading through the line behind her. Phones were emerging more openly now, though she couldn't see them. Her focus was on the interaction ahead, and on modeling the kind of response she hoped others would remember if they found themselves in a similar situation. Gate 7 was a small area cordoned off from the main security flow, with a metal detector, a table for bag searches, and a privacy screen for pat-downs. Two additional agents waited there: Agent Rodriguez, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Agent Chen, an older woman whose expression was unreadable. "Ma'am, please place your bag on the table and step through the metal detector," Rodriguez said, his voice professionally neutral. Alexandria complied, setting her messenger bag down carefully. She stepped through the detector, which remained silent. No beep, no alarm. "Please step aside for a manual screening," Chen instructed. "Certainly," Alexandria said. "Can you tell me what triggered the need for manual screening after a clean metal detector reading?" Chen paused, clearly not expecting the question. "It's part of the random additional screening process." "I see," Alexandria said, "and the random selection was based on—" Chen looked toward Johnson, who had followed them over but was hanging back, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation was developing. Rodriguez began the pat-down, following standard procedure. Alexandria stood still, arms outstretched, maintaining her dignity while allowing the process to continue. But she didn't remain silent. "I want to be clear," she said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the agents around her. "I'm complying fully with all procedures. I'm also asking questions because I believe transparency in security processes protects everyone's rights." The words were carefully chosen. She wasn't criticizing the agents personally, but she was making it clear that she understood the broader implications of what was happening. As Rodriguez completed the pat-down, finding nothing as expected, Chen searched through her bag. It contained exactly what you'd expect from a congresswoman traveling for a day trip: files, a tablet, phone chargers, and a small cosmetics bag. "Everything looks fine," Rodriguez said, stepping back. "Thank you," Alexandria said. "Can someone explain to me what about my initial appearance or documentation triggered this additional screening?" The question was direct, unavoidable, and impossible to answer honestly without acknowledging what everyone in the area already understood. There had been no legitimate trigger. This had been about assumption, about someone in authority deciding she didn't look like she belonged in the pre-check line. Johnson stepped forward, clearly eager to end the interaction. "You're cleared to proceed, ma'am." Alexandria gathered her belongings, repacking her bag with the same care she'd used to pack it that morning. She didn't hurry, didn't show frustration, but she also didn't drop the subject. "I appreciate everyone doing their jobs," she said, looking at each agent in turn. "I hope you understand that my questions aren't personal criticism. I'm concerned about how these procedures are applied and whether they're applied consistently to all passengers." She paused, letting that sink in. "I travel frequently, and I've noticed patterns that concern me. Today's interaction makes me wonder how many other passengers experience similar situations without the luxury of being able to ask questions freely." Her words were measured, but they landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward. The agents knew she was right. They'd seen the patterns too, even if they didn't like acknowledging them. Alexandria slung her bag over her shoulder and turned toward the departure gates. "Have a good day, everyone." As she walked away, the graduate student who had recorded the initial interaction was finishing up her own security screening. The video was already uploaded to her social media, with a simple caption, "Congresswoman AOC just handled airport profiling with more grace than I would have managed. Watch how she asked for accountability without losing her cool." The 90-second clip showed Alexandria's calm questioning, the agents' evasive responses, and the clear discomfort of officials who knew they couldn't justify their actions when pressed for specifics. It wasn't dramatic or confrontational, but it was revealing. Within an hour, as Alexandria's flight took off for San Francisco, the video had been shared hundreds of times. By the time she landed, it had reached thousands. The comments weren't just supportive, they were full of similar stories. "This happened to my mom last month at JFK. I get randomly selected every single time I fly." The way she stayed calm while asking for answers, that's leadership. Notice how they couldn't explain their own procedures? The stories poured in. Business travelers who looked too young for their first-class seats, students whose IDs were questioned because they didn't fit someone's expectation of what a college student should look like, families separated because parents and children didn't look related enough to security personnel. What Alexandria had experienced wasn't unique, it was routine, but her response, captured on video and shared widely, gave others a framework for understanding and addressing these situations themselves. TSA headquarters took notice of the video within hours. The agency faced a choice: dismiss it as a misunderstanding or acknowledge the broader pattern it represented. The decision would come down to leadership that had been slowly recognizing the need for reform in how security procedures were applied. By evening, Alexandria was delivering her speech in San Francisco, talking about climate justice and environmental equity. But her phone was full of messages about the morning's airport interaction. She hadn't set out to create a viral moment, but she understood its significance. That night in her hotel room, she recorded a brief follow-up video on her phone. "Today at LaGuardia, I experienced something that happens to too many travelers every day. I want to be clear. The individual agents were doing what they believed was their job. My concern is with systems that allow subjective judgment to override clear procedures." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I have the privilege of a platform and a voice that carries weight. Most passengers don't. That's why it's important to speak up, not just for myself but for everyone who has been singled out, questioned, or treated differently because someone in authority made assumptions about who they are or whether they belong." The video ended with a simple call to action. If you experience discrimination, document it. Ask questions. Be polite but persistent. And remember that your dignity is not negotiable. Within a week, TSA announced a review of its random selection procedures, with specific focus on eliminating subjective bias from security protocols. The review was prompted, officials said, by recent concerns about consistency in security screening applications. The changes that followed were incremental but meaningful: additional training for agents on unconscious bias, clearer guidelines for when additional screening could be requested, and a simplified process for passengers to file complaints about discriminatory treatment. Alexandria's 45 minutes at LaGuardia, from document check to departure gate, had become a case study in how to challenge authority respectfully but firmly. Her response showed that dignity and compliance weren't mutually exclusive, and that asking questions wasn't the same as causing trouble. The video continued to circulate for months, shared not just as social media content but as training material for travelers, civil rights organizations, and even some security agencies looking to improve their procedures. But perhaps the most important impact was on individual travelers who found themselves in similar situations. They remembered Alexandria's calm persistence, her respectful but unwavering demand for answers, and her refusal to accept "because I said so" as sufficient justification for discriminatory treatment. The lesson wasn't about special treatment or congressional privilege. Alexandria hadn't used her title until the very end, and only to make a broader point about systematic issues. The lesson was about the power of steady, respectful resistance to unfair treatment. In the months that followed, TSA reported a significant increase in passenger questions about security procedures, but also noted that these interactions were more often educational than confrontational. Passengers were learning to advocate for themselves without creating chaos, following the example of a congresswoman who had turned a potential conflict into a teaching moment. Alexandria's response at LaGuardia became a template: stay calm, ask specific questions, document everything, and remember that the goal isn't to win an argument but to expose and address systemic problems that affect everyone. The airport security interaction lasted less than an hour, but its impact rippled outward for months, changing policies, training procedures, and most importantly, empowering ordinary travelers to stand up for their rights with dignity and effectiveness. It proved that sometimes the most powerful resistance comes not from shouting or confrontation, but from simply refusing to accept normal when normal isn't right, and asking clear questions that demand honest answers.